Welcome to Biomed Explorer. In this video, I'd like to talk about two organs that almost never get discussed together, even though they secretly do most of their best work as a team, the tongue and the nose. I'll cover what these organs actually are, how a single taste signal travels from the surface of your tongue to your brain, how a single smell molecule makes the same journey through your nose, the hidden connection between the two that quietly creates almost everything you think of as flavor, what happens when something goes wrong, and the daily habits slowly dulling these senses without you ever noticing. So, let's get started. What are the tongue and nose? Most people think of the tongue as the thing that lets them taste sweet, salty, and sour, and the nose as the thing that lets them smell coffee or catch a whiff of smoke. Both of those things are true, but they're also a massive oversimplification of what's actually happening. Very few people realize that most of what we casually call taste isn't produced by the tongue at all, it's produced by the nose, working in near total secrecy behind the scenes. So, what exactly are these organs? The tongue is a muscular structure covered in a specialized surface, packed with thousands of microscopic chemical sensors whose entire job is to detect what's dissolved in your saliva. The nose, meanwhile, is far more than a simple air intake. Tucked deep inside it, high up where you'd never think to look, sits a small patch of tissue containing millions of receptor cells, capable of distinguishing an almost unlimited number of distinct odor molecules. Individually, each of these organs does something genuinely impressive, but together they combine two completely separate streams of chemical information into a single unified experience your brain interprets as flavor, and most of that magic happens without either organ ever directly communicating with the other. It all gets stitched together somewhere else entirely, inside your brain. The tongue, a surface built for chemistry. Let's start with the tongue itself. And here's something that surprises a lot of people. The tongue isn't smooth. Its entire surface is covered in small bumps called papillae, and most of them aren't actually involved in tasting anything at all. There are 4 types of papillae scattered across the tongue's surface, each shaped differently and each with a different job. The most numerous by far are filiform papillae, thin cone-shaped bumps that give the tongue its rough, velvety texture and help it grip food during chewing, but they contain no taste buds whatsoever. Scattered among them, mostly across the front 2/3 of the tongue, are fungiform papillae, small mushroom-shaped bumps that do contain taste buds, and are actually the ones responsible for most of what you consciously register as taste. Along the back edges of the tongue sit foliate papillae, arranged in shallow folds, and at the very back, arranged in a wide inverted V, are the largest papillae of all, the circumvallate papillae, only a handful in number but each one packed with taste buds. Inside these papillae, tucked out of sight, are the taste buds themselves. Each individual taste bud is a small onion-shaped cluster containing somewhere between 50 and 150 specialized taste receptor cells, and each of those cells has tiny hair-like extensions called microvilli poking upward through a small opening called a taste pore, essentially dipping directly into the layer of saliva coating your tongue. How a single taste signal travels through the tongue. Now let's talk about where taste actually starts. And it doesn't begin with flavor at all, it begins with something far simpler, a chemical dissolving in liquid. When you eat something, saliva breaks it down and dissolves it, allowing chemical compounds from the food to seep into the taste pores and make direct contact with the microvilli of the receptor cells inside. Depending on which chemicals are present, different receptor cells respond. Some are tuned to detect sweetness, others to saltiness, others to sourness, bitterness, or umami, the savory taste associated with foods like broths and aged cheese. For a long time, people believed different regions of the tongue were solely responsible for detecting each of these tastes, a strict color-coded map of sweet at the tip and bitter at the back. That idea has since been overturned. Receptor cells for all 5 basic tastes are actually scattered across the tongue's entire surface, just in slightly different concentrations from one area to another. Once a receptor cell is activated, it releases a chemical signal that triggers a nearby sensory nerve fiber, and this is where the tongue quietly reveals just how complicated it really is. Unlike most sensory organs, which report to the brain through a single dedicated pathway, taste information from the tongue actually travels along three separate cranial nerves, depending on which part of the tongue is involved, all three eventually converging deep in the brainstem before being relayed onward to a region of the brain responsible for processing taste. From there, signals continue to a higher processing region, where the raw chemical information is finally assembled into something you consciously recognize as a specific flavor. And in a detail most people never think about, these taste receptor cells don't last very long at all. They're constantly wearing out and being replaced by fresh cells approximately every 10 to 14 days, a bit like a factory floor swapping out its equipment on a fixed rotating schedule so long as it isn't disrupted. The nose, a chamber built for filtering. Now let's shift to the nose, and here the journey starts even before a single scent molecule ever gets involved. Air entering through the nostrils first passes through a narrow winding chamber called the nasal cavity, lined with mucus and tiny hair-like structures, whose job is to warm the incoming air, add moisture to it, and filter out dust and debris before it ever reaches the lungs. But tucked high up at the very top of this cavity, almost out of the path of normal breathing, sits a small specialized patch of tissue called the olfactory epithelium. This region covers only a few square centimeters on each side, easy to overlook, and yet it's the only place in your entire body capable of directly detecting airborne odor molecules. How a single smell molecule travels through the nose. A sound wave has to physically vibrate something to be detected, but smell works on a completely different principle. It begins with actual physical molecules, tiny fragments drifting off of coffee, flowers, or smoke, small and light enough to float through the air and travel up into your nose with every breath. Once these odor molecules reach the top of the nasal cavity, they dissolve into a thin layer of mucus coating the olfactory epithelium. Underneath that mucus sit millions of olfactory receptor neurons, each one extending a small tuft of hair-like cilia upward into the mucus layer, waiting for a matching molecule to drift by. Humans carry several hundred distinct types of these receptors, and no single receptor recognizes only one specific smell. Instead, each odor molecule activates its own unique combination of multiple receptors at once, a bit like a chord made of several notes rather than a single tone, which is part of why humans are able to distinguish an almost staggering number of distinct smells from a relatively limited set of receptor types. Once a receptor is activated, it triggers an electrical signal that travels along the olfactory nerve, one of the shortest and most direct nerve pathways in the entire body, straight up into a structure sitting just above the nasal cavity called the olfactory bulb. This is where individual signals from millions of receptor cells are sorted and organized into a specific pattern, a distinct signature the brain can later recognize and label, whether that's cut grass, cinnamon, or gasoline. From here, that pattern travels directly into deeper regions of the brain, including areas closely tied to memory and emotion, which is part of why a single specific smell can sometimes trigger a memory far more vividly and instantly than a sound or an image ever could. The hidden connection between tasting and smelling. Here's a detail that catches almost everyone off guard. Much of what you casually call taste while eating a meal isn't actually coming from your tongue at all. It's coming from your nose, working through a completely separate hidden pathway most people never even realize exists. While your tongue can only detect 5 basic taste qualities, sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami, your nose is capable of distinguishing an enormous range of specific, complex smells. When you chew and swallow food, tiny odor molecules released from that food travel backward, up through the rear of your throat and into the nasal cavity from the inside, a pathway known as retronasal smell, separate from the normal forward path air, takes when you simply breathe in through your nostrils. Your brain then blends this retronasal smell signal together with the basic taste information coming from your tongue, seamlessly fusing them into a single rich experience you perceive as flavor, even though two entirely separate organs, using two entirely separate types of receptors, are actually responsible for producing it. This is exactly why food tastes bland and flat when you have a stuffy nose. Your tongue is still working perfectly fine, still detecting sweet, salty, and bitter without any issue. But with your nasal passages blocked, the retronasal pathway carrying most of the complex specific character of that flavor simply can't reach your olfactory receptors anymore, leaving only the 5 basic taste qualities behind. When the system breaks down, given how many delicate parts are involved in both organs, it's no surprise that taste and smell problems are extremely common. Ageusia, a partial or complete loss of taste, can result from damage to the taste buds themselves, certain medications, or nerve damage along one of the pathways carrying taste signals to the brain. More often, though, what people describe as a lost sense of taste is actually anosmia, a loss of smell, since the retronasal pathway contributes so heavily to what we perceive as flavor in the first place. Anosmia itself can result from something as simple as nasal congestion temporarily blocking odor molecules from reaching the olfactory epithelium, or something more lasting, like direct damage to the olfactory receptor neurons themselves, sometimes caused by viral infections, head trauma, or long-term exposure to certain airborne toxins. Unlike many other sensory neurons, olfactory receptor neurons are actually capable of regenerating throughout life, which is one of the only examples of this kind of natural neural regeneration anywhere in the human body. Even so, this regeneration slows considerably with age, which is part of why smell, and by extension flavor, tends to gradually fade over the later decades of life. Chronic sinus conditions can also physically block the pathway. Air needs to reach the olfactory epithelium in the first place, muting smell even when the receptor cells underneath remain perfectly healthy. And on the tongue, conditions like a persistently dry mouth can interfere with taste directly, since taste chemicals have to dissolve in saliva before they can ever reach a taste receptor cell at all. Daily habits quietly dulling taste and smell. Even without an injury or illness, a handful of everyday habits gradually wear down these two senses. Smoking is one of the most damaging habits for both organs at once, repeatedly exposing taste buds to heat and chemical irritation while also damaging the delicate olfactory receptor neurons lining the nasal cavity, a combination that dulls flavor perception significantly over time. Frequently eating extremely hot food can also physically damage taste buds on the tongue's surface, and while they do regenerate, repeated damage can leave taste perception duller than it would otherwise be. And chronic dehydration reduces saliva production, which quietly limits how effectively taste chemicals can even reach the receptor cells waiting to detect them. The 3 main jobs of the tongue and nose. So now that we've covered all of the parts, let's bring it together. Between them, the tongue and nose perform 3 main jobs every single time you sit down to eat. The first job belongs to the tongue alone, detecting the 5 basic taste qualities directly from chemicals dissolved in saliva, using thousands of specialized receptor cells packed into its papillae. The second job belongs to the nose alone, identifying an enormous range of specific airborne odor molecules using millions of olfactory receptor neurons, both from the world around you and, just as importantly, from the food currently in your mouth. The third job happens only when both organs work together, blending basic taste and complex retronasal smell into the single, rich experience of flavor that makes eating so much more than simply fueling your body. Wrapping it up, there you have it. The tongue and nose, 2 organs most people never think to connect, working together every time you eat to turn simple chemistry into flavor. The tongue detects 5 basic tastes through thousands of microscopic receptor cells embedded across its bumpy surface, while the nose identifies a vastly larger world of specific smells through millions of receptors tucked away at the very top of the nasal cavity. And behind the scenes, a hidden pathway quietly carries flavor molecules from the back of your throat up into your nose with every single bite, fusing 2 completely separate senses into one seamless experience. The tongue and nose may be something you rarely think about beyond your next meal, but with every bite you take, they're working together in the background, converting simple molecules into the rich, layered experience of flavor you rarely stop to notice. Thanks for watching, and Biomed Explorer uploads a new science video every day. Please subscribe and share.